Great work, Enrique. I really love the dynamic fluidity, and I love the variability of the texture, and the ingenuity, and and all of the fun little added parts. Now, let's take a look at this little suggestion down here. I'm going to enlarge the page so we can see it. Every instrumentalist not playing in this bar must yell this. Olé. Okay, so I think there is a slight problem here, and that is in poetic scanning and emphasis. So the word olé, even though I'm not a Spanish speaker by any means or any kind of expert, I am accustomed to hearing the accent on the second syllable, ole, right? And in fact, that's one of the fun things about yelling it, right? Is the bum bum. There's this nice emphasis. So the way that you've got it scored right now, dun 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 dun. So you've got it coming in right here on the downbeat, dun 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 dun, dun ole. Right, so you're putting it's even if people have a impulse to say the accent on the second syllable, it is going to land on the first syllable. So and I mean, and you may correct me and say, in fact, people should yell ole instead of ole, right? So, but if you wanted to put the accent on the second syllable, you might want to adjust it so that o comes in on 3 and then lay comes in on the downbeat. Anyways, that's just a small point, but it's a fun little suggestion. Now, here's the problem, okay? And that is, you can have an orchestra, your average orchestra will actually not want to do this very much. And they'll see it in the part, and the conductor will kind of wave their arms and try to get them all to shout it, and you'll get a kind of a murmur, right? And sometimes you'll even have a very committed orchestra who thinks it's a great idea, and they'll all shout it, and you still won't hear it all that loud. It's because their mouths are sort of pointing towards their stands. And so there's a great deal of absorption of the sound of them talking, and there's usually no pitches are attached to it. They're not singing, so they don't have that to help project the sound. So you would actually have to tell them, stand up and yell at the audience, right? It is almost what it would require for that to be a really satisfying shout. So I am just warning you about this because I have gone through this myself as somebody who wrote a shout into a score once or twice. I think it was a Maori cry, and it fit into the music really, really well. And it was for an education concert, and everybody in the orchestra was into it, and they shouted it. But it just did not carry to the kids, so it was lost on them. All right, so now let's talk about the orchestration here. And just to start with the evaluation criteria, you'll hear a couple of things moving around on my desk for a second. So, pitch weight in the upper middle register. You start off in that place, and then you expand, and then contract. Excuse me. So you are dealing with that problem really nicely. And so when we get to here, the what I've termed the relentless way that Falla stays in that upper middle register, you have the wonderful quality in here of that being a contrast to lower scoring with greater scope before. Okay, so that's really nicely done. And as far as relentless driving staccato going towards the end, that is also great. You have solved the problem of thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive. If orchestrated the same way, you did use elements of the same orchestration, but you changed it around a lot. It's something that I did as well. I had the same, excuse me, the same basic orchestration model for both of my opening 4 bars and the repeat of those opening 4 bars, but I added more elements the second time. Here, you're actually subtracting elements and adding others, and that's really fun too. And then the soaring high of the melodic development, you solved that problem really, really nicely. And in fact, by dropping out the strings and entering with the winds at a different part of the pitch. So that worked really, really well. And of course, using the piccolo, just a natural, very, very high instrument, and holding off on it until later. I thought that was great as well. I also liked how you didn't bulk up the wind part or the flute part until the last bar in the strings, and then added the piccolo on top of that. I thought that is underlining the fact that new elements are arising out of the ascending figure, and so that's also strong. Also, adding the trombones and tuba, bass trombone and tuba, right there at the end. It's also very powerful. Now, as to the accompaniment figures, covering a wide range, you really went for it, and I feel that this is sort of difficult, the way that you've scored this. I mean, it's playable, but it's not all that pretty of a sound. Maybe this could have been split between 2 players. Do you know what I mean? You could have your second going bump bump bum, and you could have your first going ba bump bum. Right? I think that would be, and then you could have your second going bum bum bum, and then you could have your first going bum bum bum. I think that splitting them up is just a better idea. It's not that a trombonist can't play that. It's just the kind of effort to manage the jumping around it just kind of doesn't make it the prettiest kind of a sound. It's like not as a lot of times, like somebody will be commenting on a score and say, "Oh, well, I can do that, and I'm this kind of player." And a lot of times, my commentary is not made to question your ability to do that. It's to question whether or not the effect is going to be all that convincing, right, or all that effortless sounding, right? So if it's something that, it's possible to do, but takes, requires some effort that kind of pulls it apart a little, then that's, trying to get things to be really easily playable as much as possible, so that we can get the best effect out of the, because like, I mean, easily playable, what does that mean? That the technique is not going to distract from the approach of the musician, right? So that would be my concern in just, having your trombonist jump up to that high B, after coming from the pattern before. I mean, it's playable. It's not a big deal, but it is just something to think about. And then you've got your clarinet above. That's a nice combination. Okay, so now let's talk about scoring, what works, what maybe needs a little bit of adjustment, and so on. Now, notice here, we just had an entry, one or two entries ago, where we had a very high B, and in our first trumpet. And here you could probably hear in the mock-up, what you're hearing in the mock-up is pretty much true. The reinforcement of the trumpet overtones into the flute part, right? And the first violins. So so that really just, takes away the need for the trumpet to be scored an octave higher. It is really, it already has that powerful trebly sound. But I think, I'm remembering now, it was 2 entries ago, it was Nick's contribution that had the saxophone. So, in the context of that chord, it made more sense, but I had other suggestions. Okay. So that is all good. What I'm not so sure about is something else, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. Okay, sorry that hope that isn't giving anybody indigestion. So here I feel like this is kind of the only way that you could do this. Like having a tied grace note just puts the downbeat in an uncertain place for the other musicians of the orchestra. So going da 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 ba 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 da 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 da. That works really, really well. Tying doesn't, right? Now here we have the same thing. We have accented grace note that is not tying to the principal coming ahead of it. Okay, so I felt that was pretty well done. And then to balance against your first trumpet, A2 oboes, that is really contributing to a very, very punchy sound. What's not so likely is that the second flute is going to contribute anything to this picture, right? You've already got the very powerful sound of your A2 oboes and first trumpet, and they are being doubled by second violin. And if that weren't enough, we also have the sounding G sharp right in here of our second clarinet, adding to the harmonization in there. And against that power, against that weight, the second flute just really does not have much of a chance of contributing anything meaningful, right? I think you would be better off just having A2 flutes right in here, and then, if you must, jump down to first flute here, doubling first trumpet. But I mean, at that point, it would really be better for that to be A2 oboes, right? And then maybe having your first flute take this F, right? So it's once again, this was one of the things that I pointed out in the 12 common errors. And perhaps I wasn't emphatic enough about scoring low flute in a very, very thick texture or very, very loud texture, but it really doesn't contribute a whole lot. Second flute in its middle register against trumpet, all you're going to hear is the trumpet. Okay, now see here, this is a little bit better right in here. And, it does kind of add a little bit to the oboes, but it would be better to have a firmer A2 B right in here, because what is weak is this B in the flutes. The only instrument doubling this B is the first violin. So the first violins are going to absorb that quality of sound from the first flute, and the second flute is going to be completely blown out of the water by A2 oboes and first trumpet, right? So you end up with a note that isn't very full in the winds here, and then kind of a wasted instrument below, right? Okay, so I'm kind of going on and on about this. I shouldn't. And the other thing too, that I discussed in the 12 common errors was not scoring harp in ways that it would get buried, and there's just no way for the harp to make much of a contribution here. Now you are scoring it higher, but all of those pitches are covered by other instruments, and so they're just going to get pushed out of the sound picture. So maybe if this were scored an octave higher or more, in a different voicing perhaps, and there was big rolls going across it, you would hear more of it. But you can't hear it in the mock-up, and you're not going to hear it in a live situation, especially not over a bass drum hit, right, or a cymbal crash. Now, this has got more of a chance right in here. This should be marked fortissimo, though. but then again, you've got the xylophone, and as I mentioned in another evaluation, the sound of the xylophone will absorb anything that is going on in the harp. So that just cancels that out, right? And then this roll in here, once again, you have a cymbal crash. You've got all these other things. So the harp basically kind of doesn't do anything that is. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not worth playing. It would be fun for the harpist, but it's not really going to come through on the sound picture. Now, this glissando is going to come through very nicely, and it does in the mock-up. If this were to be heard, I would say you'd have to score it up an octave, and you'd have to mark it up to, say, maybe mezzo forte. Otherwise, it's really not going to contribute that much, and towards the end of the crescendo, it will disappear wherever it is, because of the intensity of everything else that's going on. All right, so one other little problem that is right in here, having your clarinets go, just being like a little bit behind the beat. And that is kind of an attempt to get the da-da-da-da-da-da-da kind of sound, right? Okay, but I think that if you really want that sound, you would be better off having your flutes double-tonguing measured tremolo right in here, and just having your clarinets play staccato on the beat, rather than having these 16th note offbeats, because they're really hard to play. They're just really hard to get in on the exact particular time. Now, note performer, Sibelius playback, that can handle it. They can make you feel like the player can do this. But even at dotted half note equals 60, it's really fast to be getting that syncopation in there really accurately and in a way that contributes to the music. And also, just the sense of the pitch holding is going into the staccato of the next note, right? So you've got this sounding B right here, and that is tying over the staccato right here on this C, sounding and written C. Then you've got this C, which is bouncing off, and that is tying over when the flute player hits the D. So it creates this kind of lag effect that is also messing the music up a little bit in terms of its precision. Now, a lot of that's just being covered by the xylophone, right? And then by the force of all the other players that are playing along. So, I mean, if you really want that yada-da-da-da kind of sound, then it would be better to have measured tremolo in the flute part, I think, because they can do double tonguing really, really easily. Okay. So, just talking about some of the other things in general, like everything else is scored pretty nicely, I feel. Nothing too impossible. This is fine on horn. It's covering a really nice area, really nice register right in here. Now, I think you could have easily added tenor clef right in here. Right? This just immediately improves the readability here. And then, of course, throw in, excuse me, that was still in select mode. Then throw in a bass clef going forward. I just think that it's easier. Even though it's just a few notes way up high there, you've got the grace note and it changes, and it's just more readable, easier to work out fingerings and so on. Same thing here. This is just better scored as tenor clef. I would say drop in the tenor clef here and then go back to bass clef right around here. Or here, if you like. Okay, so the only concern that I would have about the adjustment of dynamics is taking away emphasis at places in the piano score where the music is making more of a point. Do you know what I mean? Da 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 da, and then like really really tones down here. I see what you're doing here is you're really giving this phrase here all of the time that it needs, all of the dynamic space that it needs to really make this impact and push back into fortissimo. So that's cool. And then the drop down here to the second group, which is basically just strings and brass. That's also very cool. I would say this is also a place where tenor clef could, would do pretty well. Just make, especially, and look at how high you're getting right up here. They would be much more functional to add some tenor clef right in here. And then you can jump back to bass right there. So far, no breathing problems. I don't see anything that is all that difficult. The winds and the brass are going to be able to take a breath. The bowing is all right. Yeah, I mean, there's some nice stuff in here. It really is. And I like the scoring right in here. I think this is all totally playable here in our trumpets and trombones. I like the high trombone scoring right in there. Really kind of more of an alto part, that playing way, way up there on that high C and so on. Just, not in terms of ability, but just in terms of like the tone color. Because you are going to be playing that C as a pedal against the dropping second trumpet part right in here, right? So just I think that the color of an alto would sound way, way better right inside there. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to pull apart in this score, and obviously my hopes of giving everybody around 10 minutes is not going to work out. But so long as I'm having fun giving you guys extra minutes, I don't mind. Yeah, so this is going to be all about the xylophone. So just really keep that in mind. Like whenever you turn on the xylophone, it's going to take over the music, right? And it's going to just really push things around. It has such a penetrating kind of a sound. Right in here, I feel that, yeah, I mean, it's a little tricky. Like you have glockenspiel, then you have the glockenspiel continuing on at the same time as the xylophone. I'm a little dubious about that. I wonder whether or not all the mallet parts could have been just played by one player, and you could just leave out the glockenspiel right in here. Because, at this point it's just sweetening the overtones of the xylophone and is not going to come through all that loudly in its own right. But I mean, it's okay the way you've got it scored. There's kind of nothing wrong with it. Probably in a case like this, I would provide a percussion score, just with all of the parts on it, and then the players will just decide who plays what when. You might have your cymbal player deciding to play castanets right in there. Which, by the way, the orchestral castanet is something that is like fixed to a board that the player sort of clicks. It is not actual things that are held in the palm usually. I've seen some orchestral players do the actually have palm castanets, but I think the orchestral model is more of one that's more calculated and just more something that the percussionist can just pick up and go, rattle off the pattern that they need to play and then put it down and then hit a cymbal with a stick. All right, really great score, Enrique. You pulled a lot out of me on this evaluation, and I feel like I barely covered half of what I could tell you about improving it and making it even stronger. But I would just say, once again, really good work. Here I would just say stopped rather than muted. You're giving your heavy brass plenty of time to put on mutes and take off mutes, right? And here you're saying mute and open. See, that's not the same thing. So I think you mean stopped, right? But stopped is not mute. So you could just put plus marks over these notes, and then the harmonic circle mark over the first note right here, and then you can just do away with the text entirely if you like. But you should say stopped, not mute. Okay. So anyway, nice score. Really, really fun. Really enjoyed it, and a really great contribution to this year's evaluations. Thank you so much for sending it to me. Thank you for your support. And that also goes out to all of my supporters on Patreon and to all the viewers out there who are checking these Patreon supporter entries out. Thanks, everybody. I'm real excited to be doing this. And let's just go straight on to the next evaluation.